Good afternoon. I'd like to take you on a journey, and in fact, it will be time travel. So I have approximately 18 minutes to take you to 2068 and back. So we will have to be pretty quick. I'm going to talk about the future. And we as humans are very interested in the future. We just want to know what will happen in our personal life, what will happen in our work life, in our love life, how will our children grow, and so on and so on. And this desire to know the future is driven mainly by two forces. The first force is just curiosity, and the second force is fear. But of course, the future in our personal life is extremely interesting, but we have to know also the fact that in the business context, the future is not only interesting, but it's extremely important. If you know the future, then you can make better decisions. You can find new directions of development, and you can also offer new services and new products. But unfortunately, when I talk about the future in the business context, then I got very strong emotional reactions, very strong negative emotional reactions. Some people are very skeptical about what I say, and sometimes they say, oh, no, it won't happen. Or maybe, okay, it will happen, but not during our lifetime. And why is it so? Because we as humans, we cannot distinguish between the future that we want and the future that is possible. What is possible is not always something that we really want. So what is forecasting? Forecasting is not fortune telling. I do not have this crystal ball Ralph was mentioning, and I also do not read from the palm. Forecasting or strategic foresight is just analytical, very analytical job. We analyze things that can cause so-called fundamental changes in a given time perspective. And when I talk about the time perspective, we have to remember that we talk about trends and not fads. Fad is something that happens very quick. It arises quickly and then it dies really quickly. It can last for 3 months. And I am not interested in fads. I am interested in trends. And when we talk about trends, we have to remember that some of them may even last for 50 or even more years. That's why when we analyze trends, we divide them into 4 time perspectives. The first time perspective is called foresight zone, and it's long time perspective. It means that the trend needs approximately 20 to 50 years to mature. And when I say about the maturation of the trend, I mean that the trend is adopted by the society, that it's already established trend. The second zone and the second time perspective is midterm perspective. We call it innovation zone. And it takes approximately 5 to 20 years for a trend to mature. Then we have a short-term perspective, the reactive zone, which is very important because trends that are in this zone happen really fast. And they need about 1 to 5 years to mature. And then we have now this new normal, which means that we have the established trends. And why am I talking about this? Because when we work with different companies, the companies that want to be innovative, they always, or almost always, they focus on this new normal. And of course it is important because it shows us what happens with the market, what happens with the competition. But if you want to be truly innovative, you have to look also at the other trends, the trends that need more time to mature. And we have to also remember one more thing. Sometimes changes can happen faster. I always give the example of J.F. Kennedy in 1961. Back then, he had this famous speech, and he said that by the end of the decade, they would send the first on the moon. And it was 1961. They were not so technologically advanced as we are today. And they did it. It was almost unbelievable, but Neil Armstrong stood on the moon in 1969. Exactly, it was 20th of July of 1969. And why did that happen? Because they allocated all the resources they had, money, people, knowledge, to accomplish the goal. So we have to remember that even if we think that some trend can last for a very, very long time, or can mature in a very, very long time, if we as humanity think that it is important for us, then it can happen even faster. It can happen in 2 years or 3 years. And while talking about the future, we have to also remember that the future is unknown. We cannot know the future, for sure. What we can know are the scenarios of the future, different scenarios. And we have always 4 scenarios. The first scenario is growth. So we can imagine the situation we have at the moment will be growing. For example, in Poland, we have this economic growth, and we can imagine that this growth will be growing and growing and growing. Then we have the second scenario, which is collapse. And we had this situation in 2008 when we had this financial crisis. The financial market just collapsed. Then we have the third scenario, which is constraints. And we have this scenario at the moment with the climate change. So we want to maintain some status quo that we have at the moment. We don't want global warming. We don't want our climate to change. Then we have some constraints. For example, we want people to travel by public transport. We build sustainable buildings. We do not enter cars into the city centers. We recycle, and so on and so on. So we want to maintain the status quo. So that's why we have some constraints. We resign of some things. And then we have the fourth scenario, which is, for me, is the most interesting one. And this is just transformation. So we can imagine that the situation that we have at the moment will be completely transformed. It will be transformed by 180 degrees. And this scenario is very often driven by technology. And when we predict the future, we can use different methods. Because I said before, this is just analytical job. We can use quantitative methods and qualitative methods. Personally, I prefer qualitative methods because quantitative methods, they are, of course, they show us what's happening and which direction we are heading. But unfortunately, they are based on historical data, which means that sometimes, or even often, they are unreliable. And we have a lot of examples. For example, like this one, when 2 years ago, during presidential election in the United States, all quantitative methods were saying something else than after happened. That's why I prefer qualitative methods. And one of the methods I really, really like is so-called retrofuturism. Retrofuturism is the method that draws the future, which is based on the visions of the future in the past. And 3 years ago, there was a report published by the British government about the future of cities. And in this report, they analyzed over 100 science fiction books. And then they drew the future of 18 scenarios of our future cities. And I really recommend this report to you. It's extremely inspiring. Although it's old, it's like 4 years old or even more. But when I read this report back then, I said, okay, I want to do something like this. And last year, I said to my team that we are going to write a report about far future, about our future in 2068, so in our world in 50 years. But we are not going to analyze only cities, but different aspects of our lives. And then we analyzed over 50 science fiction movies, and we decided not to go for books. I decided not to go for books, because if we went for the books, then we would write this report for 10 years or even more. So we watched science fiction movies. So this is my job sometimes, that I sit in the conference room and I watch science fiction movies. But as I said before, this is a very analytical job. So we defined 11 categories like health, society, transport, city, sex, and many others. And then we drew over 60 scenarios out of these science fiction movies, and then using other forecasting method, which is called signals-based forecasting, we compress them into 11 most likely scenarios. And I want to show you some of these scenarios in a minute. But I have to say, this is the most dystopian report I have ever written. Almost every scenario, but one, is pessimistic one. So get ready. The first scenario is about our work. So the most likely scenario, we were already talking about this. Aleksandra Przegalińska was talking about this in the morning session, is that we as humans will be replaced by the machines. And we will become so-called the useless class. The work will be privileged. We won't have work at all. And if we want to have work, then we will have to develop the competences of the future. And you can see them on the slide. As you can see, all of these skills are soft skills, which means that we have to develop skills that differentiate us from the machines. So we will have to be very creative. We will have to have emotional intelligence. We will have to to listen actively. We will need to share our knowledge. We will also have the ability to transfer our knowledge to others. And to achieve this goal, we have to change also our educational system. Why? Because this educational system that we are in at the moment was designed in 19th century. And it was designed for the people, to prepare people to work in the factories. And we know that in future, people won't work in the factories. Machines will be working. The second scenario is our city. And we have different scenarios for the city, but the most likely one is that our city will become vertical agglomerations. So the cities will be rising higher and taller. They also be overcrowded because of the urbanization, polluted and dirty. And we will also see a very strong distinction between poor and rich people. So we will have districts only for rich and only for poor. And these are the problems that we are seeing and facing already. And if we want to prevent this scenario, then we have to invest in smart cities. But when I talk about the smart city, I do not think about tech city. I rather think about green city, the green city that Rachel Kite was talking about as well. We will have to invest in sustainable urbanization. We will have to build eco-green buildings. And we will have to also somehow eliminate the social inequalities. The third scenario is about our society. And again, we have different scenarios here. First of all, our society will be controllable, and it will be controlled by the government mainly. And we can see it again happening already now. We can also imagine the society where the role of the women will be subjective. We can also see the scenario where the society will be class society. We will have a very big gap between rich and poor people. But again, the most likely scenario is that we will have society without kids. And why is it so? Because we already see that people are having less and less children. Women decide to have their first child when they're in their 40s. And couples decide to have only one child. And we also now deal with the epidemics of men's sterility. And this epidemics affects mainly European countries and the United States. So we don't know what's the reason why it's happening, but we cannot see this men's sterility in the African and Asian countries. So we can imagine that it will change our world population and the structure of our society. We will have more Asian and African people in the world, and then again we will have other changes. And this scenario I'm talking about, the society without kids, is also driven by sex and human relationships. We can imagine in the future that we will have sex without any physical contact. And so probably we will have virtual sex using virtual reality. Or maybe we can have some neurostimulation, like it was in Avatar. I don't know if you remember the film. And why is it so? Again, because first of all, we see many social changes that show us this scenario. First of all, people are getting more mobile and more mobile. We have couples living not together, they are living apart. So there is one person in the couple that lives in Warsaw and other lives in Gdańsk, or they even live in different countries. And they see each other once a week or once a month. But the bigger problem is when we talk about younger generations, the millennials and Generation Z, so people in their 30s and 20s. And data shows that they have much less sex than the older generations. And it's very strange, because people who are in their 20s should have normally a lot of sex, but they are having less. But it's also easily explainable. Because why? And again, because of the fact that their life is digital. They live their life digitally. And even though they really want close physical relationships with other humans, they are so afraid of them that they cannot maintain these relationships. That's why we are heading towards world without sex, physical contact, and kids. And then we have the last scenario. Unfortunately, I won't tell you about all 11 scenarios, and this is food. It is estimated that by 2050 we will have a food crisis. This is because of the growing world population and diminishing resources. So we won't have enough ground to feed all the people. We won't have enough food, and we won't have enough water. So probably we will have to, and we already look for the alternative resources of food, and especially alternative resources of protein, which means that probably we'll have to eat insects, or maybe we will have to eat powder food, or maybe we will grow our meat in laboratories directly from the stem cells. And we can also imagine the situation, I was talking about this social inequality, but we can also imagine the scenario when the people who are rich will have real food, but the people who don't have money, they will have fake food, or they will have pulp or this powder. And again, we can see the situation already now, because people who have money, they can afford meat from the ecological meat or bio meat. And people who do not have money, they just buy meat without any meat in it. So my question is, because as I said, almost every of these scenarios pessimistic one. So is our future really so dark? And the answer is, it depends. Because we have to remember that science fiction does not predict the future. It only answers the questions we ask, and it covers the problem that we are struggling with at the moment as a humanity. So the optimistic part of this presentation is that we still have time to change the future, and everything is in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you. We always were at a point of deciding whether we were going down a positive, nourishing path or down towards a sort of a nasty dystopia where everybody dies. Except in the past, the horizon, the decision horizon, if you will, was many, many years. Now the decision horizon has shrunk. When are we going to get to a point when we actually have to decide collectively, right now, today, because there will be no more time?
Well, we have to decide day by day, and we have to decide really now, because changes happen really, really quickly. But on the other hand, I always say that I am techno-optimistic. So I believe that technology helps us to make the world better. So everything depends really on us.
It always has, and it always will. Here's a rather interesting question. If the future is unknown, should we focus all of our resources on the short term?
No,
short bets.
No, I rather recommend to focus mainly on the earlier zones, because when you when you focus only on the short term, then it means that you try to catch this called white rabbit. I don't know, Alice in the Wonderland. She was rushing to get the white rabbit. So it's too late.
He was always in a hurry.
Yeah, so it's too late. You have to see the future. You have to see the future before. Maybe I do not recommend to look at the foresight zone. Foresight zone is something that is interesting for me because I know that in business perspective, 50 years is a lot of time. But you have to look at the innovative zone. For example, artificial intelligence is a trend that is in the innovation zone at the moment. So it's like 5 to 20 years to mature. And you have to look at this trend if you want to be innovative.
Is it a question of having to look ever further the less time we have? If we have less time, we actually have to force ourselves to consider the consequences further out into the future?
I don't know. It's really, I don't know how to answer that question. Time is also a very difficult concept. I think we should just look into the future and try to look as far as you can.
I'll go along with that. Thank you.